Thank you. Can you all hear me? Oh, that's wonderful. Great. Well, you know, it's sometimes said that people with disabilities are invisible in popular culture. Or that they are visible in TV or film, they are marginal, minor characters. That's not always true. I can think of two acclaimed movies from the 80s that are explicitly about disability. Children of a Lesser God. The deaf actress Marlee Matlin won an Oscar for this role. It's about the deaf community. And also My Left Foot, in which Daniel Day-Lewis plays Irish writer Christy Brown, a man with cerebral palsy. He also won an Oscar for that role. And then there are movies explicitly about intellectual disability. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of these. And the practice is, right, that non-disabled actors have to feign intellectual disability in a variety of ways. So you've got Dustin Hoffman as a man with autism in Rain Man. Won an Oscar for that role. Forrest Gump, Tom Hanks won an Oscar for that role. Is this getting, you get the Oscar. And that's, well, I Am Sam, Sean Penn, nominated for an Oscar, did not win. And Cuba Gooding Jr., not even nominated for Radio. So in 2009, the film Tropic Thunder decided to parody this practice and satirize it with a controversial scene in which Robert Downey Jr., in blackface, also nominated for an Oscar, is telling Ben Stiller that he didn't get nominated for an Oscar for his portrayal of a man with intellectual disabilities in Simple Jack because he went full retard. Never go full retard. Now, sometimes that joke is funny, but of course with people with intellectual disabilities, it's a profoundly offensive term, and so the joke kind of backfired. But it had a legitimate target, namely the sentimentalization of intellectual disability, where we find in these films that people with intellectual disabilities are really plucky, inspirational characters who teach important life lessons to us all. So, in some ways you think, well, it might be better being invisible than to be sentimentalized, or it could be worse. You could have characters with disabilities associated with horror, or with pathos, or with evil. You can't see Potter's wheelchair, but he's sitting in it. Anyway, that's not what I came to tell you about today. I came to say something else entirely. Not that people with disabilities are invisible in popular culture, but in fact that they are ubiquitous, if you know where to look. And now we're going to know where to look. We're going to start with Dumbo. You've got to be kidding. Dumbo, I mean, he's the elephant who can fly. He doesn't have a disability. But if you see the film, there's no question when Dumbo arrives, he is a kid with a disability. He is ostracized and mocked and reviled for those ridiculous ears, and his mother is tormented by the other circus elements into madness. She actually has to be locked up because she can't take the torment. Now, of course, over the course of the movie, Dumbo learns how to fly. That's really interesting. That makes his disability into a kind of exceptionality or super ability. Well, something of the same dynamic was going on in Rain Man. If you remember, Tom Cruise realizes at one point that his brother Raymond is a math whiz and has great memory. So he takes him to Vegas to count cards and make a pile of money. Again, autism as super ability. The difference is, though, in Rain Man, when you leave Vegas, your brother still has autism. Whereas in Dumbo, the rendering of disability as a kind of super ability makes the disability disappear. That's called a happy ending. That's called Disney. Same dynamic. More recent film, Happy Feet. Mumbles is a species anomaly. He's the only penguin in all of Antarctica who can sing. In fact, he has a terrible voice. And so he is mocked and reviled and ostracized. And his father thinks he did something wrong during the pregnancy, so to speak, because he let the egg roll out while he was supposed to be incubating it, so he thinks he gave birth to a child with a disability. Well, it turns out, not being able to sing is a disability, but it's compensated for by another species anomaly. This is the most amazing tap dancing penguin you have ever seen. Right? The disability itself is not a super ability, but it's compensated for by a super ability that effectively, again, erases it. Again, happy ending. He helps save the penguins, calls attention to their plight, and the species anomaly turns out to save his entire species. More Disney, more happy endings. Finding Nemo. This is a disability start to finish. Nemo is a disabled child. I'm not kidding. Nemo is a child with a disability. He has a disabled fin. He can't swim very far or very well, and that's why his father, Marlin, is so crazily overprotective of him. Well, that plus the fact that Marlin also has post-traumatic stress disorder because he saw his wife get eaten in the first minute of the film. You'd have PTSD also, all right? And then Dory here, voiced by Ellen DeGeneres, is a fish with short-term memory loss. And this gets really interesting because the longer she stays in the movie, the more of the movie she can remember. It's as if the narrative itself cures her disability, which is an inability to understand narrative. We'll get back. I promise you they talked about this in the storyboards in the Disney animation studios. We'll get back to the short-term memory loss thing later when I talk a little bit about Alzheimer's. But for now, I hope this suffices. Disney's got disability all over the place. Now, what about the opposite dynamic of superability imagined as disability? Aha! And at this point, people tell me, Michael, you're out of your mind. Okay, Professor Xavier's in a wheelchair, but these are superheroes. They're not people with disabilities. And I say, okay, well, actually, watch the film. In the first one, we learn that Magneto gets his powers as his parents are being led off to Auschwitz. Then we cut to the present where the US Senate is debating whether the mutants should have to wear something identifying, like gays and lesbians of the Nazi regime. Then we're introduced to Professor Xavier. Then we find out they go to a special school because they're kids with special needs. And by the end of 20 minutes, the X-Men are basically gay, gifted Jewish kids with disabilities. You can't make this up. And just in case you thought I was kidding about the disabilities part, X-Men 3 takes it and makes it explicit. Because in X-Men 3, the mutants are given the opportunity to take a cure that would help them rejoin the human race, but of course they would give up their superpowers, their exceptional super abilities. And this is a kind of displaced meditation on a debate that rages in the disability community, namely the ambivalence about cure. Especially, give you the best example, contemporary culture, the debate in the deaf community about cochlear implants. For people who are in the deaf community and are signers, and consider themselves members of a linguistic minority, not disabled at all, and so cochlear implants actually erode their identity altogether. Then there's Daredevil, the blind superhero. That's an easy one. But at this point, you have to wonder, come on, this is a little bit offensive, right? Imagining disability as superability, because in real life, so few people with disabilities can actually fly. Well, the funny thing is that this goes way back in Western culture, all the way back to the Greek god Hephaestus. That's a nice Hephaestus. He's supposed to be way uglier. He's supposed to be the deformed god of metallurgy. He is the Greek disabled god, and he is cast out and comes back. The historian Henri-Jacques Sticker writes, we see here the two faces of deformity. Ostensibly eliminated, it may return, bearing supernatural powers. Contemporary version of Hephaestus and our contemporary god of metallurgy, the sprinter Oscar Pistorius, who's also on my first slide. Oscar Pistorius caused a controversy in 2008 when he almost qualified for the Olympics. He missed by 0.2 of a second, a time that would have won a medal in previous Olympics, actually. And the controversy was not only that the Olympic Committee thought he should be in the Paralympics because he's disabled, but they thought that his carbon fiber legs actually gave him an unfair advantage over other runners. Again, they imagined his disability as super ability. His nickname, by the way, Blade Runner. Which leads me to Blade Runner. Now, is Blade Runner about disability? Yes and no. The book, Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, actually explains that empathy test that you give the androids to find out if they're androids, that was not developed for androids. It was developed after a nuclear war to identify people damaged by radioactive fallout, intellectually disabled, either moderately, in which case they were considered chicken heads, or severely, in which case they were called ant heads. And they were prevented from reproducing. Now, all that narrative gets lost in the film, as does the narrative of one of the novel's major characters, J.F. Sebastian, who is a chickenhead, and he's reviled and mocked and ostracized. The movie gives you a guy named J.F. Sebastian who has no intellectual disability, but he's an engineer of the Tyrell Corporation, and he has premature aging, Methuselah's syndrome, and that links him intimately to the androids who have lifespans of only 4 years. Next example, Gattaca is kind of an easy one. Here's a brave new world of in vitro fertilization and pre-implantation diagnosis, whereby parents get to screen their kids so they make sure their kids have no major inheritable diseases or minor things like obesity, baldness, and things like that. In this brave new world, Ethan Hawke tries to buy the genetic identity of Jude Law, who was supposed to be an Olympic athlete, only won a silver medal, and so threw himself in front of a bus, hence the wheelchair. And in this world, the genetic elite work at the Aerospace Corporation Gattaca, whereas the invalids, catch the pun, like Hawke and Ernest Borgnine, are the janitorial staff. Back to Philip K. Dick. Total Recall. Okay, it's a guilty pleasure of mine because, as my wife knows, I like to go around the house saying, let's do it. Go to Mars. It's a trashy Schwarzenegger flick. It's great. And it's pretty gory, and it's got these mutants. And on the second time through, I realized, oh my God, the reason the mutants are mutants is because their parents and their grandparents were working in the turbinium mines of Mars without adequate protection from solar radiation because their employer refused to provide it. This isn't about Mars. And this guy has a super ability. He's psychic, okay? But never mind that. Never mind the psychic. Never mind the Mars. The point is that this is a film about employment-related disability. It's kind of a displaced meditation on our own history of coal mining and black lung disease. For that matter, Gattaca is kind of a film about employment discrimination in science fiction. Okay, so we got people with disabilities or disability meditations in Disney movies, superhero movies, science fiction. What about detectives? Oh yeah, plenty of detectives. I could list a bunch of examples, but I'll stick with the recent past. In the 60s and 70s, yep, everyone's favorite. In the 60s and 70s, Raymond Burr was Ironside, another guy was Longstreet, the blind detective, but Monk is the most interesting in the bunch, I think, because his disability is OCD, and his series suggests that OCD is a good disability for a detective to have. It makes him more observant. And it's even more interesting when you realize how detective fiction works. If any of you are fans, you know that part of the fun is being a better reader of the detective fiction than the detective, so you figure it out ahead of time. So this series actually suggests that some kinds of disability make you a more able participant in some kinds of genres. Okay, now this is a highly fictionalized and stylized representation of OCD. That's true. But that's my point. We're not talking about accurate mimetically accurate representations here. I mean, come on, we're talking about superheroes and comic books and science fiction. Disney, no one goes to those genres for realism. No one says, I don't think that person could really change their shape. That's just not true. The very fact that these genres are fantastic on the one hand, makes them considered more part of low popular culture, but it also makes them really interesting places to explore forms of human embodiment and disability. Alzheimer's. You could watch Away from Here. Julie Christie apparently gave a wonderful performance as a woman with Alzheimer's. But here's two weird meditations on that. Memento, about a man with short-term memory loss. The movie is actually narrated from his perspective, and it's told backwards, which is difficult. And then, 50 First Dates, the comic version where Drew Barrymore has the same disability, cannot remember anything from day to day. But Memento is a little more challenging, right? Not only because it doesn't have Adam Sandler in it, but because I expected him to cure the disability, like Finding Nemo, and it didn't happen, so I give the movie credit for that. But in Memento, because the narrator is himself a person with a disability and it's told from his perspective, the narrative effectively disables you, or the narrative itself is disabled. Okay, so we have all these various low genres in which like I say, these meditations on human embodiment. That's my point, that these are not realistic. These are displaced meditations that even in these places you can find rich and complex meditations on what it is to be human. Thank you.